Okay, so if you're watching this video, then I'm guessing that means you may need some help figuring out how to do these types of problems. It's a little tricky. So this time I gave you an answer or answers to a quadratic formula problem, and your job is to create a problem that would get me those answers. So it's probably a good idea if you jot down the quadratic formula. And it's probably also a good idea if you jot down your standard form. So basically, I'm giving you this answer, and your job is to give me this problem. So it's backwards from what you've been doing. So what I like to do is kind of match this format to the quadratic formula. So in negative b's place, I have negative 8. So it's safe to assume that negative b has to equal negative 8. And if that's the case, then that tells me my b value must have been 8. And then in the denominator, I have 5. But in the denominator of my formula, it says 2a. So I'd have to set up 2a equals 5. And if that's the case, then a would have to be 5 over 2. And then under my radical, or my discriminant, comes out to be 10, which means this must come out to be 10. So I'm going to go ahead and set up b squared minus 4ac equals 10. But I know that b is 8. So I can change b squared to 64. And I know that a is 5 halves, so I can put that in a spot. I don't know what c is, but I am totally capable of solving that equation. So we're going to subtract 64 from this side and get negative 54. If you want to multiply these together, great. So 4 times 5 halves is going to get you negative 10. And then we just divide both sides by negative 10, so we get positive 54 over 10, which is the same thing as 27 over 5. So now that you know your b, your a, and your c values, you're free to go ahead and plug those in to the standard form and write your equation. So we have 5 halves x squared plus 8x plus c. And remember, when you're using quadratic formula, the problem has to be equal 0. So the problem didn't say that your equation can't have fractions in it. It just said write an equation so that you get those answers. So this would suffice. Maybe if you don't like that, you can multiply everything by 10. So if that makes you feel better, sure, you can do that. You don't have to. So another acceptable answer would be 25x squared plus 80x plus 54 equals 0. That would also get you that answer. All right, so let's do a different variation. All right, so I still have my negative b, and then this will be the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and this has to equal 2a. So b again has to be 8. A again would have to be 5 over 2. And now this time you have to be careful. So they're telling you the square root of b squared minus 4ac should come out to just be the whole number 7. So the first thing we'd have to do on both sides is square it. So if we square both sides, now that 7's a 49. But again, we know b is 64, or excuse me, b is 8, which means b squared is 64. We know that 4ac is going to be 4 times 5 halves times c, but this time it should equal 49. And then we just solve it from there. So we should get 3 halves. So then we'll just plug it into our standard form. So we have a x squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So if you were to solve that equation right now, you would have gotten that solution. All right, letter C is, again, a little bit trickier because of the 2 root 10, but that's okay. So we have negative b equaling negative 9, which means b equals 9. That one's not hard. We know that 2a has to get us 7, which means a is 7 halves. So that one's not too hard either. We know the square root of b squared minus 4ac has to come out to get you to root 10. So again, the first thing we're going to need to do is square both sides, and this is where you have to be careful. So when you square, remember this is a product. When you square a product, you have to square each term. So we have to do 2 squared, and that's 4. And we have to do root 10 squared, which is just 10. So this side becomes 40. All right, and so b squared would get me 81. A is 7 halves, and I do not know c, but I can now solve that equation. And so I get 41 over 14, so I can just substitute 7 halves in for a, I can substitute 9 in for b and 41 over 14 in for c. And then last but not least, same scenario, I know negative b has to equal negative 8. I know that 2a has to equal 5, which means my b would be 8, and my a, once again, would be 5 over 2. So then that would mean that the square root of b squared minus 4ac would have to get me 2i root 10. And again, we're going to square both sides. And then we're going to have to do 2 squared, which is 4, I squared, which is negative 1, and root 10 squared, which is 10. So this side needs to come out to be negative 40. So I should end up getting c is 52 over 5, and then I just go ahead and rewrite everything. So we have 5 halves x squared plus 8x plus 52 over 5.